Okay, I'm just going to jump right in with my monster movies. I'm finishing up the Toho films and all of the kaiju movies that I have. I have all these MGM Midnight movies. I will save those for another time because they're double features, and I'm just going to try to get through these. But I might talk about certain ones longer than others. Jumping in with my VHS tapes as Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster. This was one of the first Godzilla movies I ever saw. I'm not super into it. It's one that I like his background. It has this really groovy kind of surf rock soundtrack that I really like. Ebra the Sea Monster is kind of cool. It goes back to I just like giant bugs and giant versions of pre-existing animals, so he's kind of cool. I really like Kumi Mizuno. She's in this, but there's a reason I never really upgraded this. Plus, this cover is kind of neat. It's not one of my favorites, but Destroy All Monsters is one that I would actually like to upgrade, and this is kind of the reason why I do eventually maybe need to get that Criterion set. This is letterboxed, and I really like the dub job in this. This is the way that I've gotten used to seeing this movie. Destroy All Monsters is a lot of fun. I don't like it as much as Invasion of Astro Monster. It's kind of like a bigger version of that with more monsters. It's not as wacky or as charming as that movie, and the characters aren't as good as that movie. But it's it's still good. I mean, any of those classic Showa era films by Ishiro Honda are just great. Features so many cool monsters in it and so many iconic scenes. Really cool one. You guys like that one? Next up is a underdog that I'm really fond of. Godzilla vs. Megalon is both the worst and the best of the Godzilla movies, depending on how you look at it. This is a really awesomely bad, fun Godzilla movie. I really like the adorable Godzilla suit in this, and I like that he's just a big dumb superhero. Jet Jaguar is really great, and the Jet Jaguar song will get stuck in your head forever. This one gets a lot of hate, and yeah, it does feel very cheap and rough around the edges, and there's stock footage galore at it, but I still, it's a lot of fun to watch and to laugh at. I don't take Godzilla too seriously, and I like that. You know, you do have the serious commentary on atomic war and atomic power, and then later in the series they become cartoons, and I'm fine with that. But I think it's funny that this is Hollywood favorites. Um, Next up is Godzilla 2000. This is the first of the Millennium series. I don't really like this one that much. Like I said in my last video, the only one of the Millennium series I really like is GMK. The other ones just feel kind of stale and bland to me. They're not horrible. I still find them more entertaining than any of the American Godzilla movies, but they're not my cup of tea. There are only about 11 or 12 Godzilla movies that I go back to over and over again, and most of those are the Inshiro Honda ones. I watched them on repeat. So then getting into, speaking of Ishiro Honda, the Toho collection from Columbia TriStar. Icons of Science Fiction includes The H-Man, The Battle in Outer Space, and Mothra. I still need to watch The H-Man. I'm terrible. I haven't gotten around to it. The Battle in Outer Space is kind of like Mysterian's Light. Um, it's not as it doesn't have as much charm or personality as the Mysterians, but the soundtrack to it's really great, and the theme to it would be used in to great effect in Shin Godzilla. Reused the Battle in Outer Space theme to really great effect. But the cream of the crop in this is Mothra. Mothra is just a great classic monster movie. As I said before, I love Mothra and I love the Shinobi Jin, the two twin fairies, and the Mothra song by the Peanuts is just lovely, and it gets stuck in your head. I adore it. Next up is, like I said, the Mysterians. This is a really cool science fiction movie, not really a monster movie, um, It's pretty cool, and the aliens look really neat with their helmets. Uh, I can't remember that lead actor's name who played one of the aliens. It's he also played the controller of Planet X. Um, but apparently he had this thing where he didn't care what kind of role he was in or how large his role would be. He believed in aliens, and if there was a chance to play an alien, he would try to take that role. And he became the leader of the Mysterians, even though he had a helmet on the entire movie. I know his name is Suchio. I can't remember his last name to save my life, which is embarrassing. But yeah, that actor is awesome. He also played the controller of Planet X, and he's in a lot of these. But he's really cool. And then Varan the Unbelievable. Varan, or Varan, I think it's Varan, which is the Latin name for a monitor lizard. Um, but yeah, Varan is a really, really neat monster. I always like that he has these membranes under his arms, so he flies around like a flying squirrel. Um, yeah, really, really cool. Great soundtrack again. A lot of this music would be repurposed and become different themes throughout the Godzilla movies. But poor Varan, another great monster that kind of gets the short end of the stick. He always ended up in other movies and then would get cut the last minute, or like Destroy All Monsters. He's in it for like a split second, and then he was supposed to be in GMK, but they cut him out and because he wasn't popular enough. But Varan kind of falls in line with those monsters that really don't have any special powers per se, so maybe that's why. But I always thought he was kind of neat looking, and this is a kind of fun, unspectacular, but fun. Matango, Attack of the Mushroom People, is one of the creepier Japanese horror films of its day. It's almost like a Invasion of the Body Snatchers kind of feel that it has, and it's pretty existential. And it borders into body horror, where these people are on this desert island and they're faced with this choice of starving to death or eating these mushrooms and then losing their humanity to become part of the mushroom collective on the island, the titular Matango. Really, really eerie, atmospheric, and very effective, somewhat disturbing movie. I really, really like this one. And I find it really funny when the Japanese, they make toys out of everything, which is just wonderful. But there's a really great action figure of the Matango riding around on a bicycle. And it's just like, they made this adorable little toy of one of the most frightening movies. I love the Japanese for things like that. They're just, oh man, they think of everything. If it exists, they've made like a great toy of it or something. They held on to that inner child quite well. It's really fun. Um, Atragon is a really cool movie. This is the next one. Atragon is one of my favorite Japanese science fiction films. It's not really a monster movie. Manda is in it, but he only appears for a little bit. It's mainly about this general who he lost the war, and he's very bitter about that. And in his mind, the war against America is still going on, and he has this really awesome battle tank, and he refuses to share it with Japan and the rest of the world against the Mu Empire, because in his mind, he's still fighting the war, and it's all about him and his estranged daughter and their relationship, and him rekindling that relationship with her, while kind of figuring out that maybe nationalism is something best left behind. And they lost the war, and it's time for him to hang that up and start to live again and start to give back to the world. And there aren't nations. It isn't about nations. It's about humanity. And I really like this movie. I find that there's a lot of really great character work in this one that I find very touching at times. Surprisingly, Dogora is one that I need to revisit. I've only seen it once, and I remember the monsters being really unique and cool, but there's this whole gangster subplot that I wasn't really vibing with. I will revisit this one. Frankenstein Conquers the World is a ridiculous movie. it was part of that deal that came about because of King Kong versus Godzilla when Willis O'Brien pitched the idea of King Kong versus Frankenstein. They split the two, and you have this weird movie with giant Frankenstein monster and Baragon. This movie is just too weird for me not to like. There's some surprisingly atmospheric stuff in it too. I enjoy it, but I prefer its quote unquote sequel, War of the Gargantuas. There's another one, Latter Day Ashiro Honda, Space Amoeba. It's about a parasite that can possess people, but it also possesses a crab, a squid, and a turtle. I cannot for the life of me remember their names. I know that's Gezora. Okay, just Gezora and Komobos, I think, is the turtle, and I can't remember the name of the crab. I'm sorry, I know. In the comments, I'll have a bunch of fanatics correcting me, but I guess I'm just not as into it as you guys. Next up is, I think this was the first Godzilla movie I ever saw. I saw it under the title of Godzilla 1985, where Raymond Burr was inserted into it. This is a really cool movie. It's I like the Japanese version more because the American version cuts out a lot of the political subtext. For me, Godzilla movies, while I enjoy the monster fun and stuff, that's only part of the equation. For me, there are two kinds of Godzilla movies. You have the ones that I enjoy for the monster romp and the silliness and the colors and everything. And then you have the ones that are a lot more socially conscious, and this one falls into that latter category. Where this is a really cool movie about like how the world would respond during the Cold War if Godzilla were to show up and basically start a nuclear war, the threat of nuclear war, because Russia blames America for blowing up one of its subs, and the Japanese government is trying to keep it under wraps because they don't want to cause a freaking panic, if they announce that Godzilla is back. And this is kind of an attempt to return Godzilla back to his darker roots. It ignores all of the Showa films except for the original Godzilla, and I rather like the Godzilla suit in this one. Has a neat dragon-like appearance. I like the fangs. He has this like snaggle tooth. And I like the big, goofy looking eyes that he has. Kind of adorable, but also threatening at the same time. Godzilla is a mean bastard in this movie. But even still, you feel bad for him when he goes out. But yeah, it's a cool movie. And anytime I watch the American version, I always want a Dr. Pepper. Next up is Godzilla vs. Biollante or Biollante. I've heard it pronounced both ways. I like to say Biollante because it's like Bio and it makes me laugh because I'm ridiculous. But I like Biollante or Biollante. I've literally heard this thing's name pronounced like 400 different ways. But this is probably my favorite of the Heisei era. This is the last one of the Heisei. The first two Heisei films are the ones that I like the most. This one's just weird, and Biollante is such a kind of beautiful, tragic monster, and that always gets me. I like a good tragic monster, and there are elements to Biollante that are just so distinctly Japanese that really just reminds you of how special Japanese monsters are compared to American monsters. The fact that not just because it's a tentacle thing, I know people make that kind of reference, but it has the soul of a girl in it. Like, no American monster movie would do that. Like, have this plant thing that has the soul of a girl in it, and that's just, it's so spiritual, and that's something that just is so unique to their movies that again, you can't capture that with the American remakes. It's just something that's so cultural that just makes me love these movies. The Godzilla suit is awesome in this. It's probably the best Godzilla's ever looked, in my opinion. He has kind of this mammalian otter look to him, and if you've listened to any of my videos before on films like The Ring of Brightwater, you'll know that I love otters. So if you have a Godzilla that looks kind of like an otter, I'm going to like him. But I like it. And it introduced Miki Sagusa, who is a character that I really like through the Heisei series. Speaking of political, this is a kind of polarizing Godzilla movie, Shin Godzilla. This is another reason I didn't like the American movies, because after you've seen Shin Godzilla, it's like, how do you go back to watching these milquetoast American Godzilla movies? This is like the ultimate modern Godzilla movie. It's a lot of people complain that the movie doesn't really have a central character or focus on any central character, and doesn't have a traditional plot structure, and it focuses more on all of the bureaucracy and like the red tape that they have to go through in order to even do anything, to even try to stop Godzilla. Um, but that's something that I really like about it. It was, again, I sometimes I go to these movies for that social commentary, and I was digging the hell out of that. I thought it was hilarious, and I remembered how the Fukushima disaster was handled, and it was just calling back to that. It was so spot on, and also the movie Akiru, the Akira Kurosawa film, is one of my favorite movies, and they touch on similar themes. How certain things just don't get done because you have to ask, like, oh, there's this department and this department and this department, and it's madness. So I almost say that this is like the Akiru of its day, but the monster movie. And I really like that. Plus, it features probably the most frightening Godzilla has ever been. He is actually legitimately horrifying in this movie. The purple ray that he shoots is beautiful. I didn't even know he was CGI. The CGI in this is so good that I just assumed it was a guy in a suit because he moved like a guy in a suit. And he has limited movement, and they did a really good job with it. Like, I didn't even realize it was CGI until after the fact. Godzilla is just so gnarly in this movie and scary, and they give him some extra things that are very unexpected, and that's the thing about Godzilla in this, is he just keeps escalating and things just keep getting worse and worse, and it features one of the most terrifying final shots in film history. And I saw this with some friends, and the connotations that are introduced in that final shot can keep you talking forever. I won't spoil it for anybody who hasn't seen it, but it's chilling. And my friends were like, "Oh, okay, and then they can make a sequel with this." I'm like, "No, I don't want a sequel, because here's the thing: the premise that this introduces is so much more horrifying if you don't see it. You can imagine it. If you saw it, it would be kind of, it just wouldn't feel like a Godzilla movie, and it would be a little, I don't know, just not as effective. I think the threat of this, the threat of it, what the ending of this movie presents is so much more horrifying, and I don't want to follow up with it for it. This is just a perfect, like, standalone revision of Godzilla in modern times, and everything great about Godzilla. All the social commentary just brought into modern times so well. Can't say enough good things about Shin Godzilla. Man, it's awesome. And seeing that in the theater was just the coolest. It's like I'm watching a Japanese Godzilla movie in the theater. This is the real deal. Sorry, I have the hiccups. Next up is Ultraman. I'm not going to spend too much time talking these. I have all the 66, or was it 67, Ultraman series. This is a wonderful show, and I sometimes put these on if I don't have time for a full Godzilla movie. I can always put on a episode of Ultraman. It's almost like a mini little kaiju movie, all in like 20 minutes. They're really, really great. I love the Science Patrol uniforms, and that's another thing I would really, really love, like seeing people in those uniforms because they're really cool. Next up is the Gamera movies, starting with Gamera, the Giant Monster, aka Gamera the Invincible. The first Gamera movie. This is when Gamera was kind of trying to do the Godzilla thing a little bit. It still has the whole child angle that would define the rest of the Gamera movies, but it's pretty much standard giant monster movie. Gamera is really unique, a unique visual though, because the the flying saucer design, how he gets around. That's such a unique mode of transportation. These movies are really imaginative. They're cheap, but they have this imaginative, almost Sid and Marty Krofft, like H.R. Puffin stuff kind of feel to them. At least in my opinion, especially when you get to the alien worlds in some of these later ones. Gamera vs. Baragon is one of my favorites. This Baragon, not to be confused with that Baragon. Um, this Baragon, or Barugon, shoots ice out of his mouth, but he also has this killer rainbow that shoots out. Again, this is what I mean when I say these monsters are really outlandish and very imaginative, and I enjoy them. Then we have Gamera versus Gauss and Gamera versus Virus. Virus has a little bit too much stock footage for my liking, but Gauss is a really great monster, and he would, pretty much just pop up in so many more Gamera movies. He's like probably, I think he's Gamera's most reoccurring monster. In fact, I think he might be the only one that comes back. He's supposed to be a bat, but he has this little laser. He drinks blood too. Next up is my favorite. This is my favorite of the Showa era Gamera movies. Gamera versus Giron. He's this giant knife guy. This whole movie takes place on this weird alien planet, and there's a part where Gamera does this like Olympic somersault thing around this pole, and it's hilarious. Alien chicks in this are cute. I have a thing for I guess I just have a thing for Japanese women playing aliens, because these alien women in this remind me of like Miss Namikawa in Monster Zero. I just love those ridiculous outfits. They're very cute. And the kids in these are a lot of fun. I don't find them annoying at all. These are movies that I would have liked when I was a kid, and when you watch them, you just keep that in mind. These are kids' movies. These aren't meant for adults, and you just kind of have to take a step back. Gamera vs. Jiger is pretty good, but I like this one the best. Gamera vs. Zigra is one that I need to revisit. I've only seen it the one time, and then Gamera Super Monster is a collection of stock footage, and there's footage from Star Wars in it, and there's anime footage in it, and it's just kind of like really ridiculous how much stock. The whole movie's just made up of stock footage. But another thing about the Gamera movies is I really, really like the song, the Gamera song, and it plays over and over and over again in these movies, so much so that Mystery Science Theater did a riff on it. That was a lot of fun with Mike Nelson at the piano. And Gamera's really neat. Gamera's made with turtle meat. Gamera's the latest thing. Gamera makes our hearts sing, sing, sing. I have these really neat monster candles I got from Walgreens a couple Halloweens ago. Next up is this big boy, this big box set of Heisei era Gamera films. These are probably the greatest kaiju films ever made, in my opinion. They handle the human drama so well. It's so compelling, and it's just such a dark, unique spin on Gamera. These are the polar opposite of the Showa era Gamera movies. These are serious, they're dark, they have this whimsical quality to them all at the same time, which is surprising, that they can feel like these whimsical fantasy movies, but also be dark and serious at the same time. I really like that Gamera has a connection to this girl, like this spiritual connection and this bond. So the human characters just have a lot of play in these movies. And again, it goes back to when people say, oh, the monsters are all that matters in these movies. If you say that, I'm just going to say, if you say that the monsters are all that matters in the kaiju films, you're watching them for the wrong reasons. I'm sorry, I'm just going to say it. Because there's so much more to these movies than that. But the special effects in these are great. Gamera just looks amazing, and he has this sense of scale. And it just does such a really good job of placing him inside of the cities. A lot of the angles, street view angles looking up at him, and just a sense of scale. Absolutely terrifying. And the other monsters in this are ruthless too. If I had to pick a favorite of the three, I like The Revenge of Iris a lot because it gives Gamera and his familiar a foil. There's a dark version of them. It's this girl who lives alone, and her parents were killed by Gamera. Not on purpose, because Gamera is here to save the world, but he doesn't necessarily save people. He's just there to stop, the monsters, but he might kill in the process. He might kill thousands of people. That's not, it's not his fault. He's not trying to, but, for Gamera, it's all about saving the world. It's not about saving the people, or it's just getting rid of the threats, but he kills her parents, and so it's all about her discovering this other monster and gaining a bond with it. And I really like that dynamic and how it flips the first movie on its head. This is just such a perfect trilogy as far as just building its themes and its ideas throughout. They're awesome. I do need to upgrade these. Next up are the yokai monster films. I love Japanese yokai a lot. I mentioned in one of my earlier videos, I was talking about the movie Kwaidan, based on the book by Lev Kadio Hearn, a collection of Japanese folklore. The yokai are part of that, and there are these hundreds of the wonderful monsters. And this is another thing about Japan that I like is, again, it goes back to their relationships with monsters and spirits being so different than ours. These are characters. They're not all of them are meant to be afraid of. You're not meant to be afraid of all of them. A yokai can be anything. It could be anything that exists for 100 years and is a well-loved object, such as the Kasa Abake, I think that's what his name is. He's a umbrella yokai. They can be everyday objects, but they can also be things like Kappa, which is a water spirit that looks like a frog and a turtle mix, and he drowns children and sucks the blood out of their anus. But in these, he's quite charming. But yeah, some of them were cautionary creatures. Some of them were meant to be respected. Some were your friends, some were not. So there's this pantheon of Japanese monsters, and there are hundreds of them. If you can think of it, there's a yokai devoted to it. But this is a really cool movie because it's a horror movie, and it's a lot like Kwaidan, where it's an anthology, except there is a wraparound story. It cuts to all of these tales, but then there's this whole story of the magistrates and whatnot, and betrayal and all of that, and the yokai invading. But it's like 3 or 4 different stories within that. But really cool movie. My favorite of the bunch is probably Yokai Monsters Spook Warfare. And this one is a little bit more of a fantasy movie, and the yokai in this are the main characters. It takes about 6 different yokais and singles them out and makes them into characters, and they're fighting this Babylonian. I believe he's Babylonian. His name is Daemon. He's evil, and he comes to Japan, and he's taken over the magistrate, and he's doing all these terrible things, and he basically fights off. They have to band together to fight him off, and this is a really cool one. But it's weird because these are Daiei Studios, and they did the Gamera movies, but these movies are completely different. They're completely different than those. They have more in common with something like Kwaidan or Juketsu or something like that, rather than the Gamera movies. They don't have that feel at all. Or the Daimajin movies, which I forgot to bring out. I'll have to do those on my next video. I have those on tape as well, but I'll get to those in the next video. Next up is the Yokai Monsters, along with Ghosts. I've only seen this one once. This one's similar to the first one, where it's a bit more of a horror film. It's a bit more methodical. It's based more on the human characters, and the yokai kind of take a back seat in it. I need to revisit this one, but you can't go wrong with any of these. These are awesome. And
You know what? I think I am going to continue into these, or no, actually, I am going to stop here. I have talked enough. I will get to my midnight movies and I'll bring out the Daimajin movies next time and I'll talk about them. But anyway, I'm going to sign off for now and have a good day.